right, back on the Young Turks. Cenk, Ben, and Jonathan Kim is here from Rethink Reviews.
What are you pointing at?
Your beer that's flowing over.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not in the shop, though, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. No.
Well, now the story's out.
Okay, yeah, it's contained. It's contained. I was worried.
It's Sam Adams cherry wheat with a delicious cherry flavor and all the goodness of whole wheat.
That was pretty good, man, on the spot. This guy should do ads. All right, now we are reviewing Bhutto this week. It's a documentary about Benazir Bhutto, of course. Let's watch a review first and then some amazing facts, including how Pakistan has gotten so much more fundamentalist. Let's watch first.
He had a sort of Washington salon, some members of Congress, a whole bunch of journalist friends, and she charmed everybody.
She was speaking quietly. Everyone would sort of lean forward because she was enrapturing.
She would say what she thought, and people would come out of meetings with her saying, my God, I can't believe that she said that. But it served her well because people began to trust her.
She also used her contacts in the Arab world. Libya, for instance, she had this ability to live in both worlds.
On December 27, 2007, the political career and life of Benazir Bhutto ended when she was assassinated outside a rally in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Bhutto, who came from a wealthy and prominent political family many compared to the Kennedys, had twice been elected Prime Minister of Pakistan, the first and only woman to ever lead a Muslim state. But the story of Benazir Bhutto, who was born 6 years after the creation of Pakistan itself, could easily and tragically be an allegory for her country's ongoing struggle to modernize, democratize, and throw off the shackles of military and religious rule. The comprehensive, captivating documentary Bhutto attempts to tell that epic tale. Benazir began her political education early as the eldest child of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who founded the populist Pakistan People's Party and was elected Pakistan's fourth president in 1971 and prime minister in 1973. A sharp dresser who attended college in California, Zulfikar symbolized the modern face of Pakistan, and it was he who decided that Benazir would not wear the burqa and made the controversial decision that she, not his oldest son, would carry on his political legacy. Benazir's education at Harvard and Oxford during the late 60s and early 70s, where she witnessed the power of democracy, protests, and women being treated as equals, would forever shape her political views. But Zulfikar, and later Benazir, would fall victim to forces that have been tearing away at Pakistan since its inception. Pakistan's citizens were unhappy that Zulfikar's government had engaged in corruption and had not delivered on many of its populist promises. Pakistan is 97% Muslim, and its mullahs were upset that Zulfikar had not done enough to make the country more conservative. And, to appease Pakistan's military, which holds more power than the civilian government, Zulfikar chose a general named Muhammad Zia al-Haq to be his chief of staff, who would eventually oust and execute Zulfikar and throw Benazir in prison. Benazir would eventually be released and return to Pakistan from exile to run against Zia, who would die in a mysterious plane crash. In 1989, Benazir became Pakistan's youngest and first female prime minister, only to be ousted the next year on corruption charges, for which she was never tried, and replaced by one of Zia's protégés. In 1993, Benazir would again become prime minister, only to be kicked out in 1996 due to more corruption charges. As several people in the film attest, these charges were almost certainly invented by Pakistan's Inner Services Intelligence, or ISI, an ultra-powerful wing of the military described as a combination of the CIA, the NSA, and the Pentagon, which never liked Benazir's more liberal and secular agenda and bristled at having to take orders from a woman. Benazir would spend most of the early 2000s in exile, only to return to Pakistan in 2007 to challenge the rule of military strongman and American, quote, ally Pervez Musharraf. It was there that she was assassinated in an attack that was at the very least covered up by the Musharraf government, and was probably committed by a combination of the government, the ISI, or Islamic fundamentalists, many of whom were on government or military payrolls funded by US aid money. Using extensive news footage and interviews with Benazir's family, husband, friends, writers, scholars, political figures, as well as Benazir herself, Bhutto paints a portrait of a charismatic, intelligent, and complex woman who gave her life to save an even more complex and troubled country. A woman who fought for women's education and was a symbol of female empowerment, yet had an arranged marriage and didn't repeal Pakistan's harsh Sharia laws. A woman who helped eradicate polio from Pakistan and brought water, electricity, and communications to rural areas, yet was still feared in those areas as a threat to Islam. A woman who had to take on dangerous opponents from the military and the mosques, but also had to fight family members, including her brother, whose murder some claim was orchestrated by her followers. As the world watches in fear as Pakistan moves closer to nuclear-armed chaos, Bhutto leaves one with the queasy feeling that the forces that doomed Benazir Bhutto and her moderate platform will also doom Pakistan, and maybe some other unlucky nations with it. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a Rethink Review.
All right, powerful stuff. So, Jonathan, some of the things that always drives me crazy in situations like this is, how do we know? How do we know if, there really is corruption or there isn't corruption? How do we know who actually killed her? It's maddening.
Well, let me just point out first, and Jonathan will know more. You talk readily here about like a whistleblower, and anytime somebody comes up, the way the powerful forces here condemn them and they Scott Ritter them up, or
Right.
I'm pretty sure that happened to Benazir Bhutto. I mean, was there something to hang their hat on in the Pakistani government to say there are allegations of corruption? Probably.
Right. No, I'm sure. Look, that makes all the sense in the world, right? But the problem is, then that creates a situation where there's no downside to corruption, because everybody gets accused of corruption anyway, right?
Yeah, that's what they were
saying. Right
saying.
or wrong, right?
Yeah, they're saying that basically in Pakistan, if you want to get rid of elected officials, you charge corruption. And they're saying that the ISI actually, they plant stories in the newspaper, which is run by the government. They leak information or they fabricate information, and that's what gets them kind of drummed out. I mean, my take on it is that I'm sure just in a country like Pakistan where the government is very weak, doesn't have a lot of control, that people are just going to take money when they can. But at the same time, like, it depends on how you define it, because is there not corruption in the U.S. system? Except we just do it openly. It's like, oh, I want this earmark so this company in my district can make our jets or whatever it is. Is that not corruption?
It's also on a so much smaller scale than the thing that she brought, which was a whole, we talked in the show today about how we have no long-term economic game plan. She was a force of gigantic change in the country, a whole different way of thinking. And then, and they got her on corruption charges. I mean, that was the game. They were, for crying out loud, it's the same forces that accused her of corruption, the same guys who just caught her father, charged him with corruption. The whole world says, don't kill this guy, please don't kill this guy. The world says it. And they hung him.
Right.
It backfired.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying. Like,
I got it.
I'm really sure that it's largely BS, right? And like Ben's saying, even if some of it isn't BS,
it's not
right. To connect to all of your points, everybody's doing it. This is just used as a fig leaf for getting rid of her because they don't like the other things that she's doing, which is bringing change, etc. But when you get to change, that's also interesting because look, she is bringing change to a country that we view back when she first got in there as fundamentally conservative, Muslim, etc. But in a lot of ways, it's more fundamentalist now than it was probably 30 or 40 years ago.
Right.
So I don't know. It's this weird dynamic. Tell us the madrasa numbers, because that's amazing.
Right. In the beginning of the movie, they have a lot of statistics about Pakistan. It's 97%. The country is 97% Muslim. It's the 6th biggest nation in the world with 180 million people, and the number of madrasas went from 189 in 1940 to 40,000 in 2010. And the education budget for the country is 0.8%. The military budget is 25%.
25 to 0.8%. And by the way, look, of course, the madrasas being Muslim teaching schools are, of course, because of modernization, going to multiply. That's a form of education. Not one that I'm particularly happy with, but it is, right? But from 189 to 40,000, it's definitely also partly that the country has gotten much more fundamentalist.
Right. So the question is, how are you relating that to Benazir Bhutto? Because she was prime minister for 20 months the first time, and then what about the second time?
I think for like 2 or 3 years or something.
You're talking about somebody who was president for 3.5 years, and the reason she got killed was because she was literally trying to stop this stuff.
No, absolutely, right. Absolutely. No, I'm noticing this trend overall. Like when it comes to Bhutto, she's a fascinating character. She helps to modernize the country. As John said in the review, getting rid of polio, bringing water, electricity, huge changes.
Some westernizations. There's some similarities, at least with her, ideas of how to change Pakistan to Ataturk.
Well, she was trying to make it more secular, but the thing is, like, with there being so little education and so much poverty, if you want your kids to be fed and clothed and learn how to read, you have no choice but to send them to a madrasa. Where else are they going to go? And unfortunately, you know, and I don't have the exact stat, but the population is something like 50% of the population is under 18. It's an unbelievably young country. And so this is the best recruiting tool is madrasas.
You know, when you say how are you going to get your kids fed and get them educated, I mean, the obvious comparison to me then, and that we missed, and that Israel missed consistently, is Hamas. That's what Hamas did. That's how they won. They didn't beat people down. They put you in school.
Right.
And they made sure the poor could eat, and they ran government services that then when they run against the Palestinian Authority, the incredibly corrupt Palestinian Authority, they win in a landslide. Because these guys have schools.
Another comparison.
You know, and almost as importantly as schools, what I left out was hospitals.
Yeah. The other comparison here is that Hamas went after the young, right?
Yeah.
Including, you remember those goofy things that we used to run where their version of Sesame Street where they're like, and you have to kill the Israelis.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Right, and they have like these scary puppet shows and stuff. But in countries, well, Palestine, of course, is not a country, but in occupied territories like that, and in countries like Pakistan where there's such a huge number of young, if you target the young, you can achieve victory in a small period of time. Right, because they're going to be in charge soon.
Right, and Benazir Bhutto's father, when he ran for office, the slogan of his party, the Pakistan People's Party, was food, clothes, and shelter.
That's pretty simple.
That was their slogan, and they won in a landslide because the people didn't have those things.
And what's that associated with in that, especially in that era in the world? That's communism, right? That we're going to take everything we have and we're going to get. I don't know whether her father was a. I don't know enough about him. I mean, I know that it was nonsense that he got charged with corruption and hanged by a dictator who ended up getting his. But I like how you say the mysterious plane crash. Somebody killed him.
Yeah.
But it's curious because, I mean, you know, if he'd killed, I mean, you figure that we know he killed Benazir Bhutto's father, and then he gets killed, but I don't know that anyone thinks, did Bhutto's people do that?
It's a real question because there's someone in the movie that says, well, you know, the plane he was on, it was 100% military. You know, it was military plane, pilots off a military base, so no civilian could have gotten to it. And so maybe there's a question of whether aspects of the military
it
are
was
now
an
turned
internal,
against the sky.
Right, which seems more likely to pull off something like that. Is there any question that there was some degree of sabotage on that plane?
Unless it was like some exploding mangoes, it was something like that.
So I mean, it was.
It blew up in midair.
Oh, okay, all right.
So.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, I mean, we had, you know, we had the TWA flight 847, I think it was, that also blew up in midair, but that was
a missile.
Central, right? That was the central oil tank that blew up.
Right. It would be an amazing coincidence in a country full of assassinations of leaders. So then, you know, one of the other things that is the question is, who is the government of Pakistan? Because, you know, you mentioned in the review that I believe that the military is stronger, right, than the civilian government. But how do they make decisions? Who makes decisions? Does the military come in and dictate things, or how does it work? Do you have any sense of it?
There's one guy in the movie who says whether it's a dictator or a democratically elected leader, the military runs it. And I think just because they have all of the power, and I think the government is so weak and hasn't been able to affect much change and get an alliance with the people. And the military is where people sort of, I mean, it's like a lot of poor countries like North Korea. That's where everyone gets their pride. And her father, actually, Benazir Bhutto's father, was the one who said, after India got the bomb, who famously said, like, Pakistan will get the bomb even if we have to eat grass for 1,000 years. And so that's kind of where, everyone in Pakistan, they see India as an existential threat, and which is a lot of why they fund the Taliban, because they don't want India to get more power in Afghanistan, basically squeeze Pakistan from both sides. And the Taliban and also kind of the Pashtun in the tribal areas will be like a good buffer to them, and they'll be more friendly to Pakistan than they would be to India.
You know, it just makes people's head. This is why the Bush administration were such clowns. Because they refused to see, as previous Republican administrations have, as I mean, you know, obviously Bush's father understood it, Reagan understood it, Ford understood it, Nixon, everybody, and Carter and Clinton. Like, it's a complicated world, man. like you can't just say, oh, the Taliban's bad, because there's so and why does Pakistan support the Taliban? They support Taliban because the people they fear most in the world are Hindus. And the Taliban, and they don't want to have the same problem on both sides of the issue, and it's all unbelievably, unfathomably complicated. And then Pervez Musharraf, he brings her out of exile. He let her come back, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was some idea that they were going to allow some sort of power sharing thing where he was going to step down and she would become prime minister and maybe he would become president. But then
then she was kicking his ass.
It appears that basically that the Pervez Musharraf government had her killed, and they actually talk about in the movie there was an attempt on her life 3 days before the one that killed her.
Yeah, I remember.
After she was on the street, they said a few minutes before the bomb went off on that street, all the street lights went off. And then this bomb goes off. And then when she was finally killed, the first thing that the Musharraf government said was, oh, like she fell and like she ducked or hit her head and on the window lever or something. But of course not realizing that all these people are gonna have video cameras and you see a guy come up with a pistol, shoot her, and then the bomb goes off. And then of course the UN did a report about the assassination where only 23 pieces of evidence were collected. And also the Musharraf government famously hosed down the street right after.
And of course, we don't know, and I'm less of an expert than literally anybody in the world, but I mean, we don't know whether Musharraf was involved or the military was involved over Musharraf's head, but obviously he wasn't upset about it. He obviously benefited from it, and let's presume that he had something to do with it. Well, and she's this sort of revolutionary, perhaps, leader in this dangerous part of the world that so needs a reformation. Musharraf probably has her killed, and then in 2001 we're putting our arms around Musharraf, and we should have, because he's opposed to the guys who just killed us, and will prevent those guys who just killed us.
He claims to be.
He claims to be, but what he has done is prevented those guys who killed us from getting a hold of Pakistan's nukes. What he's, of course, Musharraf is walking a different line of trying to make sure that he doesn't alienate the military or alienate the revolutionaries, the fundamentalist revolutionaries, or God forbid, the fundamentalist revolutionaries in the military. It's freaking complicated.
Right, and onto this, on the assassination, look, that's all overwhelming proof already, hosing down the streets, come on, right? But here's the one other thing. If it wasn't them, they would be motivated to find out who it was. But the Pakistani government, just golly gee willikers, could never really quite figure it out, right? You see what I'm saying?
I think early on they said, oh, it was Al-Qaeda, but they were saying that before really any investigation had started. So they're saying, well, that's going to prejudice everyone in terms of who they might think it is.
I don't know, and I'm not trying to be deliberately obtuse, but it's so complicated, and we know there are so many different factions that even if it was a particular military faction that was using it to, I don't know, blackmail Musharraf, but then afterwards you're like, well, okay, we gotta, no matter what, we gotta clean it up because these guys are too powerful to challenge. And then all over the world, the military, does it control things, and like Jonathan said, in these small countries, and Chile, I mean, yeah, it's a civilian coup. I mean, it's a military coup, but then civilian leadership, and it's all tied together. Like we have this clear delineation here, and I don't know that we realize, friggin' the Soviet Union, who controlled that? Like, I mean, you think that those guys who, from Chernenko on back through Brezhnev, those guys were always terrified of the military.
Well, I think a good metaphor between the military and the civilian government in Pakistan is our government with the corporations. Who actually really runs our government? I mean, sure, we elect people all the time, but the corporations are the ones calling the shots.
It's a little. I'm gonna. That's too much.
I don't think so. I'm with John on this one.
No, come on.
Look, because they win. Yeah, they win no matter if the Democrats or Republicans are in charge. So.
Yeah, but we live in a world where that restricts freedom and there are political assassinations all the time. I'm not even saying that's not a valid point, but you don't compare it to these dangerous fundamentalist military dictatorships.
No, it's an analogy. We're not saying they're killers. We're just saying that they run our government, right?
Yeah, but by the way, I don't even buy the analogy.
But then if I want to stretch that analogy, we start wars where hundreds of thousands of people die, and they make no freaking sense, except that they make sense to the defense contractors who get rich off them.
Or oil companies who want us to go and install friendly leaders.
As always, things that have some similarities aren't necessarily similar.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, and then finally, look, on Pakistan overall, what do you walk away with here? I mean, every time I read an article on Pakistan or I see what's happening, I think it keeps getting worse, not better. And I think the country is becoming more and more fundamentalist, and they do have nukes. I think it's the most dangerous country in the world. Am I seeing that wrong, or do you get the similar sense watching this?
Yeah, I came away, with just that it's a real mess, and it's sliding backwards more and more. I don't really see, and it's so complicated, and we've tried so much to play kind of a short-term game. Like the guy who had Bhutto's father executed, we of course supported him. We kept him in power, gave him billions of dollars to fight the Russians. Musharraf, he's a military dictator. We support him. But and of course, what they do is they give all this money to the Taliban, to armed groups who are then who run around the country and basically degrade the quality of life and the power of the government in that country. I don't know what pulls it out. I really don't.
Yeah. All right. On that cheery note.
Well, one final thing, and I'm sorry, I'm probably repeating myself, but I think it's the most important thing. She was pretty cute. Am I wrong?
I think for for a
like
politician,
there was a couple pictures in that.
Yeah,
she's a very nice looking woman.
That was a good-looking Indian woman.
Please, how dare you? How dare you? All right, and by the way, I think the politically correct term is she was striking. She was a striking figure.
She was striking. Do we have one? Can we find one picture of her?
Well.
Just throw up a good-looking picture of her, Jesus.
No,
you have a naked picture?
No. It's, please, end it. All right, rethinkreviews.net. Rethink Reviews on Huffington Post and YouTube. Jonathan, as always, a pleasure.
Nice job,
fascinating. And we've got an insane post game coming up for you, including progressives versus Obama supporters. Anime. But it's not Japanese animes. Don't worry. Okay, and that in the post game.